Hi guys, I hope everyone is doing well. I miss you all. I want to take some time today, and hopefully you're watching this and listening to this as we're starting new material. We're getting into the branches of government, and we're switching up our learning. It's definitely a learning curve, not being in school with you and figuring out all this virtual learning together. So we will get through it. Please make sure that you email me, uh, ask any questions either on Google Classroom, email, anything you need, any kind of help you need, I am here. Okay, so let's start talking about, first of all, our bicameral Congress. So we have a bicameral legislature, meaning that Congress, which is our legislative branch, is made up of two parts or two houses, as we call them. So we have the Senate, which is one house or one part, and we have the House of Representatives, which is the other. Bi simply means two. So a bicameral legislature simply means that we have two parts of our Congress. We have the Senate and the House. Okay. Part two was all about congressional power and the three types of power that Congress is granted. So the first is expressed powers, and these are the powers that are directly stated or given in the Constitution. So if you look at a Constitution, which I know you all do all the time, you will see these powers directly given to our legislative branch. So examples of these powers would be defending our nation. Okay, Congress is specifically given that power. It is written in the Constitution that they have the power to defend our nation. They're also specifically given the power to finance our national government. So express powers then lead into implied powers. Okay, and when you think of implied powers, I want you to think of when we talked about the necessary and proper clause, that Congress is granted the powers that are necessary and proper, okay, to do what they need to do, and that would be the implied powers. So they're not directly stated, they're not written in the Constitution, but they're drawn from those expressed powers. Whatever Congress needs to do to follow through with those express powers. So our number one example of an express power was defend a nation. Okay, so they have the power to defend our nation. So it's then implied that they are able to declare war. They're able to maintain armed forces. Those things are necessary in order to defend our nation. So they're not written, but they're implied that they have the power to do so. Our second example of our express powers were finance the national government. Since Congress has the power to do this, granted by the Constitution, it's then implied that they have the ability to collect taxes. They create how much tax we pay. They're able to borrow money from other governments. Okay, so whatever is necessary and proper to follow through to do those expressed powers. Okay, inherent powers. So think about when you inherit something. Okay, something that has been around over time has needed adjustment. You have to remember our Constitution is a living document, and powers are expressed, powers are implied, and you also inherit powers along the way. So these are powers that Congress has in order to accomplish these expressed and implied powers. They've just kind of been inherited by Congress over time. So going back to our number one example of express powers, which is defending a nation, it's then implied that they are able to declare war and maintain armed forces, but then over time, we've also had to control our nation's border. And due to these expressed and implied powers, it's just inherited that Congress would take care of these. It's inherent that they are going to control our nation's border. We border Mexico, we border Canada. That's also part of defending our nation. So that's one of those inherent powers. Okay, so those are our three main powers of Congress. Let's jump into the Senate. Okay, the Senate has 100 members. Okay, and it is blanket for each state. Okay, we have 50 states, so we have 2 senators per state giving us our 100. It doesn't matter the population, it doesn't matter the state size. Every state has 2 senators. So California is a big state, Delaware is a tiny state. Both have 2 senators. It does not matter how big, small, or their populations. Okay, so we will always have, unless we add another state, 100 members of our Senate. So the 2 main powers that the Senate holds is they try impeachment cases brought by the House, which we've kind of talked about a lot before we were out of school due to President Trump's impeachment hearings and what was going on there. They also vote on bills and legislation from the House. So all bills and legislation start with the House of Representatives, and then once they're approved, get sent to the Senate for approval. Okay, the Senate has to approve the exact same bill, if you remember, before it can get to the president's desk. So we'll be discussing how a bill becomes a law Thursday and Friday. I know you're all excited. The vice president is the one who is in charge, if you would like to say, of the Senate. They are president of the Senate. So Mike Pence is currently our president of the Senate. And it's largely a ceremonial position. Their big job would be if there is a vote that is cast and the Democrats and the Republicans are tied 50-50 because we have 100, so it is possible that the president of the Senate, okay, so Mike Pence, would be that deciding vote. So he would vote one way or the other, breaking that tie. So largely ceremonial position unless it comes down to there's a tie and the president of the Senate or our vice president needs to vote to break that tie. Okay, let's talk about positions in the Senate and their counterparts positions in the House of Representatives. Pretty much do the exact same thing. That's why I didn't put this down under the House of Representatives as because if you understand what they do in the Senate, they do basically the same in the House of Representatives. So your majority and minority leaders, these are the ones that hold true power. They are elected by their party members within their Senate parties, and they often meet with the Senate majority and minority are going to meet with the Speaker of the House. They're also going to be meeting with the President, so they're the ones that hold the true power. Their party members, who are their fellow senators, are the ones who elect them to that position. Majority and minority whips, just like they sound, right? If you're bad, you get whipped. So they're responsible for party discipline. They keep their members in line, and they're making sure that the other senators in their party are behaving properly, not getting into any trouble or doing anything they shouldn't be. And then finally, we have the President Pro Tempore, and it's basically another ceremonial title. It's usually granted to the senior member of the majority party. But what they do is if the vice president is not available, they kind of step in and fill those shoes. So if the time needs them, they're there. Other than that, they're pretty much ceremonial. Okay. Moving on to the House of Representatives. So we have 435 members in our House. So quite a few more than the Senate. And that's because our representatives are based on our state population. Okay. In order to represent us as a state and as a population, there has to be equal representation among the people. So in this case, California is going to have way more representatives than Delaware is going to because California's population is way higher than Delaware. Okay. So the House introduces legislation. So bills, legislation, they all start in the House. They originate revenue. They also have the sole power of impeachment. So it's up to them to bring articles of impeachment against a president, which, like I said, with the Senate, we talked a bit about with President Trump. We also talked about in our last unit how to approve a constitutional amendment, and that starts with a 2/3 vote by the House. Our third in line for presidential succession is the Speaker of the House. So if something happens to our president and vice president, our Speaker of the House then becomes president, and they're elected by the majority party in the House of Representatives. They're essentially the leader of the House. They preside over the House. They're the principal leader of their party. They're the ones who are going to assign bills to committees. And they're also going to assign membership to that committee. So they're going to say, you need to go to this committee because you're specialized in this. It makes sense for you to do that. So, in theory, if something were to happen to Trump and Pence, Nancy Pelosi, who is our current Speaker of the House, would then become president. Okay. And finally, congressional committees. So this is who in the House gets to, the Speaker gets to delegate who goes into what committee. And it's typically based off of what they're specialized in. So if they're specialized in the armed services, they're going to go into a committee that deals with that. If they're specialized in banking, they're going to go into maybe the budget or the banking committee, something along those lines. So committees just handle a specific duty, a specific jurisdiction. And you did a couple committee activities. So committees, they handle specific things. I've given you a couple examples here. You didn't have to have these by any means. They're just some of the ones I pulled. But both the House and Senate have their own committees. There are some joint committees where they both work together. Absolutely. But the majority of committees are separated between the House and the Senate. Okay. And they all focus on things just like it sounds like. If it's agriculture, they're going to deal with farmland, they're going to deal with animals. Armed service, they're going to deal with military. Okay. Budget, they're going to deal with the U.S. government budget, which you're going to be working on next. Banking, housing, urban affairs. They're looking at rent, deposit insurance. When you put your money in the bank, is it insured? And also export controls. Okay, so each committee has specific things that they are focused on, specific jurisdictions. Okay, so this is a pretty brief overview of the legislative branch, things that you've been covering over the past 3 weeks. Okay, so make sure that you have all the information you need. If you have any questions, please email me, shoot me a message on Google Classroom. Whatever you need to do, and I will help you as much as possible. I am happy to help. I miss you all. Next, you're going to be working on a budget activity for the U.S. government, and then Thursday and Friday, we are going to talk about how a bill becomes a law, and then do some more review. And next week, you can look forward to having a little test, because I know you all miss tests and quizzes so very much. So that's it for the legislative branch review. Have a great day. Miss you all.